social needs of South Africa. To discuss, you saw in there Zwelenzima Vavi, the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU. And via Skype, we're joined by Zwelenzima Vavi, who is the Head of Monitoring and Advocacy at the Public Service Accountability Monitor, PSAM. Zwelenzima, let me start with you. Was it a worker-friendly budget, as you had hoped?
No, it wasn't. We never hoped. I presume
not.
No, we never hoped. We made it absolutely clear after listening to the minister presenting the medium-term budget policy framework statement last year that this is going to be the business as usual, that is going to show no regard to the crisis that the workers and the poor are facing in the country. And insofar as we predicted that that is going to be the case, we are not disappointed. But of course, we condemn the budget as a pro-rich and pro-wealthiest South African and international business person budget, and it compounds the crisis that the workers and the poor of our country are facing. And we see no hope for the deepening levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, and we are not inspired at all. Instead, we are going to come up for a more beating from the budget. Today, in addition to what was announced last year by our previous minister, there's more sin taxes. In addition to the 6 to 10% increases of last year, there's more fuel taxes. In addition to what we received last year, and there is no talk whatsoever of touching corporate taxes or even personal income taxes. They are left unattended, meaning that the program to continuously reduce the burden of paying taxes away from the shoulders of those who can afford into the shoulders of the poor and the marginalized continues as part of the program of this government.
Can I ask you a very simplistic question? Business creates jobs.
Yeah.
So why, as a labor organization, do you object to a business-friendly budget?
We have been into this path for the past 24 years. Business create jobs, reduce the taxes, do nothing about the illicit cash outflows, do nothing about the biggest crimes and corruption that are being committed by business against the people of this country, reduce the exchange control so that they can find it even much more easy to move money out of the economy we so desperately need into the tax havens everywhere else in the world. We have been in this path. One clever person once said, repeating the same mistakes over and over again with the hope that you're going to change your situation is a sign of insanity.
All right, I think that we do have Zwelenzima Vavi with us from Public Service Accountability Monitor via Skype. Zwelenzima, if you can hear me, was this pro-poor, or like Zwelenzima Vavi says, did it again forget the poor and workers of this country?
Yeah. So from our perspective, both from the Public Service Accountability Monitor and as members of the Budget Justice Coalition, it is of concern to us that this budget, again, is not adequately pro-poor, which is a call that we've been making over various submissions, various sharing in terms of our media engagement. So we would certainly highlight the fact that this is not what we believe to be a budget that recognizes the needs of the most marginalized, the needs of the most vulnerable.
What would you have liked to see? As usual, we saw social grants rising. That safety net does continue for many South Africans.
This is true, and I think it is well worth highlighting that in relation to areas like social development, health, and community development, as that function group is called, those are areas that are clearly prioritized in terms of capacity of spend in the medium-term expenditure framework is its theme. But for us, it's perhaps not so much about the allocations, but in essence, actually what the real term allocations are on the one hand, and on the other, what is prioritized in the budget. And I think as we've spent time scanning the areas, we do believe it to be a regressive budget, and we also believe it to be a budget that, again, doesn't take into account sufficiently the need to do away with debt and not to spend so much on servicing debt. So that's one area, an immediate area of concern.
All right, Zukiswa, unfortunately, that Skype audio not great. We'll see if we can bring her up again. In the meantime, I continue with Labour leader Zwelenzima Vavi. So you were saying nothing has changed. Looking at the budget review today, it says the labour market obstructs easy entry into employment, particularly for young people. So the labour laws that Labour has pushed for years is being blamed here for unemployment. Your response?
Absolutely. Always beat the more vulnerable and leave the bullies alone. That's what the minister is saying. The minister today remembered, by the way, when he was addressing the SAFTU marchers in Cape Town, that he pioneered the labor legislation in the country in negotiations with the then powerful COSATU and other federations at the time. And they produced a balance of what they thought will work, supported by business, the communities, the labor movement, and the government. And now that you have tasted the fruits of the other side as a business person and is coming back into politics, he is now bringing all of that rhetoric from the politics of big business, where they blame the victims of unemployment for creating the unemployment crisis.
Let's listen to what the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni had to say around the issue of jobs.
The private sector is a key engine of job creation. Government's policy actions aim to remove policy uncertainty so that confidence returns to economic agents. The 300 billion rand worth of pledges made at the investment conference last year demonstrate that there is pent-up private sector demand if we grab hold of the opportunity. Visa requirements are being relaxed, accompanied by administrative measures to make it easier for tourists to visit and invest in South Africa. We've also increased the income eligibility threshold for the highly successful employment tax incentive scheme. Jobs for 1.1 million young South Africans are supported by this program.
All right, so saying that business is crucial for job creation, back to the debate. Mr. Vavi, is there any argument to say, let's let go of a few current jobs, let some privatization happen for the sake of future jobs? So earlier, the business and investor guests were saying Telkom is a great model. The government kept a stake, but it opened it up. It was run like a private business. Well, it is. It has investors. It's open to competition, and it's been a wonderful success. Isn't that the way to create jobs?
Wonderful success, Telkom. Please.
Telkom's growth rate was off the charts on the JSE for a while.
There were about 50,000 to 60,000 jobs at Telkom at the dawn of democracy. There are about between 13 and 17,000 jobs left at Telkom. And South Africans know that the whole promise of access to telecommunications led by Telkom, the landlines, of course, there's a big factor of cell phone companies. But the phones are no longer affordable. And if you go to any working class home, those things are now have become toys they're playing with because they are disconnected. So it's success from what point of view? From a developmental perspective of driving the program to make sure that South Africans can speak to one another across the board, irrespective of their class affiliation. Definitely a typical example of what privatization does to society. We are now being asked, by the way, allow yourselves to be killed now, die, because we are promising you that in the second coming, you will suddenly get all of the employment opportunities you lost. And we want to put the point very clear. We heard the language that the minister actually was telling the country in a very smart way that there's going to be big programs of privatization. And in a very clear way, he had put his finger on the faces of the public servants that is going to get them retrenched. And we want to warn him that the days where Labour must just show another cheek and get another clap are over. We were mobilizing in Cape Town, not with friends, but with affiliates, by the way, just to correct you. This was a march of all marginalized members of the working class communities battling for health, access to healthcare, access to education, fighting against water restrictions, high prices of water, evictions in the townships, as backyarders, evictions in town. It was a march of all those the marginalized members of the society. And this is the only way going forward for the working class. If we think that we can fight uncoordinated, fragmented actions and hope that this government, so arrogant, will ever listen to us, forget it. We need more united forms of action like the ones that we saw in Cape Town today.
All right, let me bring in Zwelenzima Vavi again. She's head of monitoring and advocacy at the Public Service Accountability Monitor. Zwelenzima, you were saying earlier that this is a regressive budget. Explain that, and what would you need to say it's progressive?
Yeah, Francis. I think amongst the things that would allow us to say that it's a progressive budget that meaningfully realizes rights to health, education, and basic service delivery would be precisely that, that we are able to track that we are able to see that. So, for instance, we would want to clearly see what prioritization of gender-based violence or against, the abuse, essentially, and that at the moment is difficult for us to track meaningfully. We would want to see very clearly how taxation budget is not regressive and again isn't punitive against the most marginalized, and so it continues. We would also want to see that relates to very important infrastructure, education.
Okay, Zwelenzima Vavi, unfortunately we're not hearing you again. I apologize for that audio. I see that you're nodding when she says it's not protecting the poor.
The regressive taxation system is, just to take the point that Zwelenzima is making forward, means this. Government inherited a budget, a fiscal and monetary policy from the apartheid era, where the corporate taxes were sitting at around 45%. Today, over a period of time, they have reduced those corporate taxes to 28%. They have increased the VAT, which is being used, which impact more on the poor than it will impact on the rich South Africans last year, meaning that they are shifting the burden of paying tax from the shoulders of the corporates into the shoulders of the poor South Africans, with this mistaken belief that alone will entice big business to invest more in the South African economy. Unfortunately, the opposite have happened in South Africa. As we speak, the big corporates are sitting on over R1 trillion investable cash that they are refusing to invest in this economy. Through the removal of the exchange controls, they have moved out of this economy billions and billions of rands into elsewhere. They were allowed to shift their listings away from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange into London and New York so that they can make money and rob South Africa the resources that we need to invest and to create industries here in South Africa. They are continuing with the illegal practice of moving billions, 115 billion rands every year through illicit cash outflows and mispricing, as well as the illicit trade practices, including cigarettes trading. And in that way, they're robbing this economy billions. So The more they do that, the more the government wants to make concessions to the very same class that have proven itself to be such a selfish, unpatriotic group of South Africans hell-bent on milking this economy dry through the hefty salaries that we see for the CEOs, whilst they are insisting that the workers must get a 20 rand an hour.
Besides illicit outflows, some of the issues you've raised touch on that fear that, say you raise taxes too much, companies will leave South Africa. Even if you keep your local companies here, others who could come and invest and create jobs will not come. Should we ignore that fear?
When the apartheid regime was taxing them 45%, with the campaigns we were running as the democratic movement, they didn't leave. When the apartheid government was restricting their movement of money out of this economy by having speed bumps and exchange rates, they didn't leave. And when the whole world was calling on them to disinvest in South Africa, very few of them responded to that call. So this threat that we must just kowtow to their dictates all the time is proven to be a fallacy based on the history of South Africa. It's a fresh history. Before 1994, we used to have up to 10% of our pension provident funds set aside to buy government bonds so that we can build more efficient state-owned enterprises that unfortunately our guys have destroyed as we speak.
Well, this is being mooted. So the finance minister said today that government would not take over Eskom's debt, but he has suggested maybe the issue of the Public Investment Corporation will be looked at again, taking on some equity in Eskom. Do you support that?
Look, from a progressive point of view, any progressive-minded South African should support the usage of provident fund, pension funds to invest in their state-owned enterprises.
What some say is a black hole.
Hold on, that's the problem in South Africa. There is nothing that have discredited more the role of a developmental state that is progressive than, unfortunately, the 25 years of an ANC government. Now, we are scared to call on the government to use the very same instruments that were used during the apartheid to force greater levels of investment in the economy, even by workers' contribution directly, because we are scared of what is coming out of the PIC inquiry that shows how the hyenas eat indiscriminately, irrespective of whether this is an old pension money or old pensioners' money, or this is a vulnerable workers' money. We know that. So we're scared to say, use that instrument, because we think that we'll walk around with an egg in our face as soon as that happens, under a very corrupt government, as we now know.
So I have one final important question to ask you about Eskom, but first let's listen to an earlier quote around the state power utility.
At the core of this plan is a subdivision of Eskom into 3 independent components. This will set the electricity market on a new trajectory and allow for more competition, transparency, and a focused funding model. Pouring money directly into Eskom in its current form is not sustainable. I want to make it clear, the national government is not taking on Eskom's debt. Let me repeat that. I want to make it clear, the national government is not taking on Eskom's debt. Eskom took debt in the first place. It must ultimately repay it. We are setting aside 23 billion rand a year to financially support Eskom during its reconfiguration.
Mr. Zwelenzima Vavi, earlier you spoke about Eskom, saying even though it's done well financially, it's not a good model because jobs were lost. My question is, do we save jobs that are not needed? Do we keep on bailing out SOEs to save jobs because workers pay for those bailouts through their tax as well?
Let me tell you what is always the strategy of neoliberals here at home and everywhere else in the country. They inherit the best working state-owned enterprises that are rated #1 in the world in terms of their performance, efficiency, and providing very cheap services to the people, such as this government inherited Eskom from the apartheid, rated #1 in the whole world at some point, just like SAA was rated the #1 in the world in terms of its efficiency, in terms of its profitability, in terms of offering cheap prices. What the minister is not telling the country is what then happened. And now that they have messed their places up, including SABC, by the way, Petro SA and everywhere else, where they have been allowed a full control, they've destroyed them. When they've destroyed them, they turn around and say the best strategy moving forward must be to hand them over to the private sector. If you listen to the minister today, something that perhaps the president is not keen to say, but he allows the minister to say, is that they're going to allow more competition in the generation of electricity. What does that mean? It means that they are going to invite more international capital, as they have done so through the independent power producers, to compete with Telkom. And here's the irony. That competition is going to be funded by Vericel Telkom as it is happening. As we speak, Telkom is forced to buy a kilowatt of electricity from these IPPs at R2.22.
You mean Eskom?
Eskom.
Yeah.
Eskom. I'm sorry, did I say what? Sorry, Eskom. Eskom. And they are forced to buy that very same electricity they have purchased for R2.22 at 89 cents. Meaning that Eskom is being asked to subsidize the private sector, the international multinational corporations that have been invited here with the clever BEE partners here in South Africa. Eventually, that strategy is designed to collapse Eskom so that more sense and it will make more logic for government to now say, you see, it has collapsed, it has a 459 billion debt, we're only giving it 69 every year. Sorry, South Africa, it was a nice try. The multi-billionaires must now take it over.
All right.
And we're going to be resisting that. It's going to happen over our dead bodies.
I wish we could continue, but thank you for a very comprehensive worker response to the budget today. That was Zwelenzima Vavi, General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU. We take a short